The crystal glass felt cold and heavy in Liam's hand, an anchor in the swirling sea of quiet hostility that was the Vance family's Sunday dinner. Across the polished mahogany table, a battlefield of linen and silver, Julian Vance, his girlfriend Amelia's brother, was holding court. He just finished a story about closing a seven-figure deal, his voice slick with the casual arrogance of a man who had never known a day of genuine struggle. His gaze, sharp and mocking, slid over to Liam. "Speaking of which," Julian said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial smirk, "Liam, how's the art thing going? Still designing logos for local pizza joints? You have to let me know if you ever break the $50 an hour barrier. We'll all pop some champagne." The laughter from his mother, Eleanor, was a delicate, tinkling sound, like ice cracking. Richard, the patriarch, offered a non-committal grunt, his attention fixed on carving the roast with surgical precision. He was a man who measured worth in square footage and profit margins. Liam, in his eyes, didn't even register on the scale. Liam's eyes found Amelia's. He saw the flicker of panic, the familiar shame that washed over her whenever her family aimed their polished barbs his way. He saw her open her mouth, a small, silent O of protest before it snapped shut. She looked down at her plate, her silence a louder betrayal than any word Julian could utter. She had told them he was a freelance graphic designer, a description that was technically true but contextually a devastating lie. She'd painted him as a charming but aimless dabbler, a lovable loser, a safe and unthreatening partner who would never overshadow her or her family's glittering status. They thought he was a nobody. They thought his worn, 10-year-old sedan in their driveway, parked deferentially behind Julian's gleaming new Porsche, was the sum of his ambition. They thought the simple, unassuming leather tube he often carried with him, which leaned against his chair right now, held sketches for dog-walking flyers or craft fair posters. They didn't know. They couldn't possibly know that the man sitting at their table, the man they treated as a court jester, was the most sought-after and enigmatic architect in the world. They didn't know his real work was done under a pseudonym, Aethelred, a name whispered with reverence in the boardrooms of global development firms, including Richard Vance's. They didn't know that within a few short weeks, their entire world, built on a foundation of perceived status and brittle arrogance, would be brought to its knees by the very man they were so casually trying to break. I'm glad you're here for this. We've all felt underestimated at some point, haven't we? If you've ever had to bite your tongue while someone judged you unfairly, I think you'll want to see how this plays out. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and be sure to stick around to the end to see justice served. Now, let's get back to the story. The quiet drive home was thick with unspoken words. The air in Liam's car, a space that usually felt like a sanctuary for him and Amelia, was now charged with the static of her failure. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. He could feel her gaze on him, pleading. "Liam, she began, her voice small. "I'm sorry about Julian. He's an idiot." "He is," Liam agreed, his tone perfectly even. It was this calmness that always unnerved her after an incident. Not anger, not shouting, but a quiet, unnerving stillness, as if he were an oceanographer observing a tidal wave from a safe distance. "But the issue isn't Julian's idiocy. It's that you agree with him." "What? No, I don't," she protested, her voice rising. "I hate when he talks to you like that." "It's mortifying." "It's mortifying for you," Liam corrected, turning a corner with practiced smoothness. "Because you're ashamed of what they think of me. Or rather, what you've led them to believe about me. A $50 an hour graphic designer, a pizza logo artist. That's the man you're presenting to them." "That's not fair. It's complicated, Liam. You don't know them. They're so obsessed with money and status. And if I told them, if they knew..." She trailed off, unable to even articulate the truth of his success. It was a secret he had guarded for years, not out of shame, but as a filter. He wanted to be loved for the man he was, not for the name Aethelred and the billions in development projects attached to it. When he'd met Amelia, he thought he'd found that. He'd told her the truth about his work a few months into their relationship, showing her the private portfolios and the global press that speculated wildly about the identity of the mysterious Aethelred. She had been amazed, but also, he saw now, terrified. It was a status she didn't know how to manage, so she'd buried it. "If they knew the truth, what would happen, Amelia?" he asked, his voice still quiet. "Would they be forced to respect me? Would they have to stop treating me like a charity case? Is that so terrifying?" "They'd treat you differently, yes, but it would be for the wrong reasons," she argued, ironically using the very logic he himself had once held. "They'd fawn all over you and try to use you, especially my dad." "And you don't think I can handle your father?" Liam asked. The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. "The real problem is that you think their validation is something worth protecting. You'd rather I be humiliated than you be uncomfortable. You'd rather I be small so you don't have to be brave." Tears welled in her eyes. "That's not true. I love you." "I know you do," he said, and the sadness in his voice was genuine. He pulled up to her apartment building. "But love, real love, doesn't ask someone to shrink themselves to fit in. It doesn't stand by silently in the face of disrespect. It defends, it champions, it's proud." He paused, his hand on the gear shift. "I love you too, Amelia, which is why this is so difficult. But I can't let you keep diminishing me to make your family feel powerful. It's not fair to me, and ultimately, it's not fair to you." He looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "You're better than this. I need you to prove it." She didn't have an answer. She just cried, a silent, shuddering sob, before getting out of the car and disappearing into her building. Liam watched her go, a profound ache in his chest. He had given her an ultimatum, a chance to choose. He hoped she would make the right choice. But as he drove away, his hand drifted down and rested on the worn leather tube in the passenger seat. Inside were the preliminary concept drafts for the Serafina project, a revolutionary self-sustaining coastal biosphere resort. It was the project the entire architectural and development world was buzzing about. It was also the project that Richard Vance had publicly stated his company would acquire at any cost. Liam sighed. He had a feeling this was going to get much more complicated before it got any simpler. He hoped he was wrong, but strategy was his art, and he knew how to see the lines of a conflict as clearly as the lines of a building. The foundation of his relationship with Amelia had a crack in it, and he knew, better than anyone, that a compromised foundation could bring down the entire structure. Their meeting had been a cliché of modern romance, a chance encounter in a crowded bookstore. Liam had been in the architecture section, running a hand over a dusty volume on forgotten brutalist masters. Amelia had been looking for a novel, a splash of color and fiction in a life that felt increasingly monochrome. She dropped a stack of paperbacks, and he'd knelt to help her, their hands brushing as they both reached for the same book. Her laugh was unguarded, a sound like wind chimes. He was struck by her seeming lack of artifice, a refreshing change from the world of posturing clients and socialites he secretly navigated. He'd introduced himself simply as Liam, a designer. For their first few dates, he let her believe he was exactly that, a man making a modest living through creative work. He enjoyed the simplicity of it, the freedom of being seen without the heavy mantle of his professional identity. He drove his old sedan. He took her to small, intimate restaurants he'd loved for years. He talked about art and form and light, not about budgets and zoning laws. And she seemed to love that man. She was vibrant, intelligent, and funny, seemingly unconcerned with the superficial markers of success that defined her family's world. The first crack appeared 3 months in, at a dinner with her friends. One of them, a woman with a voice as sharp as her designer handbag, had asked Liam what he did. Before he could answer, Amelia jumped in. "Oh, Liam's a freelance artist. He does all sorts of creative things. Logos, websites, you know. She'd said it with a bright, dismissive wave of her hand, as if his life's work were a charming hobby. The lie wasn't in the words, but in the tone. The condescension was subtle, a fine poison. He'd felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Later, he'd asked her about it. "Why did you say it like that?" "Like what?" she'd asked, all wide-eyed innocence. "I was just telling them what you do." "You made it sound like I paint birdhouses in my garage, Amelia." She'd become defensive. "Well, what was I supposed to say? My friends, they can be a little judgy. I was just trying to keep it simple." That was the night he decided to tell her everything. He took her back to his modest, uncluttered apartment, an apartment he kept specifically for this purpose, a place of peace away from the grand, Ethelred-designed home he actually owned across town. He unrolled a set of blueprints on his simple wooden dining table. They were for the recently completed Museum of Aqueous Light in Kyoto, a building that had been hailed as a masterpiece. "I designed this," he said quietly. "My name, my professional name, is Ethelred." He watched her face as she processed it. The initial disbelief, the quick Google search on her phone, the dawning shock, and then something else. A flicker of what looked like fear. It wasn't the reaction he'd hoped for. He had envisioned awe, excitement, a shared secret that would bind them closer. Instead, he saw the weight of her family's expectations settle onto her shoulders. "My God, Liam," she whispered, staring at the screen of her phone, at articles from Forbes and Architectural Digest, speculating about the hermit genius. "My father, he talks about Ethelred all the time. He says he's the only true visionary left in the world." She looked from her phone to him and back again. "He's obsessed with getting the contract for your new project, the Serafina project." "I know," Liam had said. "Vance Development is one of a dozen firms on the long list." The conversation that followed was the beginning of their silent, corrosive pact. She'd begged him to keep it a secret from her family. "They'll change, Liam," she'd pleaded. "Everything will become about this. My dad will try to leverage our relationship. My mom will turn you into a social accessory. Julian will be, I don't even know, a sycophantic nightmare. Please, let's just be us for a little while longer. Let me be with Liam, the man I fell in love with, not Ethelred, the global phenomenon." His heart, softened by his love for her, had agreed. He understood her fear of her family's shallow nature. It was, after all, the very thing he'd built his anonymous career to avoid. He thought he was giving her time. He thought he was protecting their relationship. He didn't realize he was handing her a weapon to use against him, a shield for her own cowardice. He was allowing her to build a false narrative, and now, months later, the walls of that narrative were closing in on him. Every condescending dinner, every dismissive comment from her family was a brick in the prison of his own making. He had allowed her to define him as small, and her family, like wolves, had smelled the perceived weakness and were moving in for the kill. The irony was suffocating. In Richard Vance's office, Liam's pseudonym was spoken like a prayer. In his dining room, Liam's real name was spoken like a joke. The dichotomy was no longer sustainable. He had given Amelia the chance to tear down the false narrative. Now he had to see if she would take it. The occasion was Eleanor's 60th birthday, a lavish affair held in the sprawling gardens of the Vance estate. A string quartet played softly near a rose garden, and waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with trays of champagne and canapes. Liam stood beside Amelia, feeling conspicuously underdressed in his simple dark blazer and trousers, though the fabric was of a quality none of them would recognize. He had his leather tube with him, a habit he refused to break. It felt like a talisman, a quiet reminder of who he was amidst the glittering facade. Julian, already 3 glasses of champagne in, swaggered over to them, a proprietary arm around his latest girlfriend, a woman who looked like she'd been assembled from a catalog of luxury brands. "Amelia and Liam," he said, his eyes doing a slow, insulting appraisal of Liam's attire. Glad you could make it. Trying to absorb some culture? He then turned to his girlfriend. Liam's an artist, very bohemian. The word was delivered like an epithet. Amelia's hand tightened on Liam's arm. Julian, don't be a jerk. It's Mom's birthday. I'm not being a jerk. I support the arts, Julian said with a wide, insincere grin. He gestured toward Liam's car, visible at the far end of the long, curving driveway. I was just thinking, Liam, my firm is looking to do a bit of charity. We could probably fund a new set of wheels for you. Something from this decade, maybe? It's a bad look for Amelia, you know. The cruelty was so casual, so breathtakingly confident. Liam didn't flinch. He simply met Julian's gaze with a look of mild curiosity, as if observing a strange new species of insect. That's very generous of you, Julian, he said, his voice calm and level. But I'm quite fond of my car. It's reliable. Reliably slow, Julian snorted, turning away to grab another glass of champagne. Later, as they mingled, Eleanor glided toward them, her smile a perfect, painted curve. Liam, darling, she cooed, placing a hand on his arm that felt more like an appraisal than a welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I've had the most wonderful idea. Liam braced himself. Eleanor's wonderful ideas were usually Trojan horses filled with condescension. You know my annual Children's Hospital charity luncheon is next month, she continued, and the theme this year is A Garden of Dreams. It's all very whimsical, and I thought of you, with your artistic flair. How would you feel about designing the menus and the little place cards? We can't offer much of a fee, of course, it's for charity, but it would be wonderful exposure for you among my friends. The offer hung in the air, a masterpiece of passive aggression. She was offering him a craft project, a task she might assign to a talented high school volunteer. To his left, he saw Amelia's face flush with color, a mixture of anger and humiliation. He waited, giving her the space to speak, to defend him, to say, Mom, that's incredibly insulting. Liam is a brilliant designer, not your party planner. The moment stretched. The string quartet seemed to hold a note. Amelia looked at her mother's expectant face, then at Liam's calm, waiting one. He could see the battle raging within her. He could see her calculating the cost of confrontation, her mother's displeasure, the disruption of the party, the inevitable argument, and he saw her choose the path of least resistance. Oh, Mom, that's a nice thought, Amelia stammered. But Liam is really busy with his own projects right now. Right, Liam? She gave him a desperate, pleading look. She hadn't defended him. She had made an excuse for him. She had validated the premise of the insulting offer, merely arguing a scheduling conflict. It was a subtle but critical failure. Liam gave Eleanor a serene smile. Amelia's right, Eleanor. My schedule is quite demanding at the moment, but thank you for thinking of me. He let his hand rest on the top of his leather tube. Inside were the revised schematics for the central atrium of the Serafina project, a design so complex and innovative it required the invention of new carbon-filtering glass. The plans in that tube were worth more than the entire Vance estate, including the garden, the string quartet, and every bottle of vintage champagne. The irony was a physical weight in his chest. Oh well, Eleanor said, her smile not faltering as she'd already lost interest. Another time, perhaps. She patted his arm again and drifted away, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and quiet degradation. Liam looked at Amelia. Her face was a mask of misery. I tried, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. No, you didn't, Liam replied, his voice devoid of heat, but full of a terrible finality. You managed it. There's a difference. He looked out over the perfectly manicured lawn, at the guests laughing and drinking, oblivious. He felt a profound sense of detachment, as if he were watching a play in which he had been miscast. He had given her a chance to rewrite the script, and she had chosen to stick to the original, demeaning draft. He knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would have to write the ending himself. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in the hushed, amber-lit interior of Orsay, a restaurant where the entrees cost more than most people's weekly grocery bills. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner for Richard, who had just secured a major municipal contract. The entire Vance family was present, radiating a collective smugness that seemed to dim the surrounding tables. Liam had been a last-minute invitation from Amelia, a desperate plea to, "Try again, please. It will be different this time." It was not different. He was seated at the end of the table, a geographical representation of his status in the family. The conversation flowed around him, a river of talk about mergers, acquisitions, and the lamentable state of the servant class. Julian was loudly recounting a story about a trip to Monaco, while Eleanor critiqued the flower arrangement on a nearby table. Halfway through the main course, Richard's face lit up. "Well, well, Marcus Thorne," he said, his voice booming slightly. A silver-haired man at a table across the room looked over and gave a polite, if cool, nod. "Who's that?" Amelia asked. "He's the CEO of Thorne Consolidated," Richard said, his voice tight with rivalry. "My biggest competitor for the Serafina project bid. The man is a shark. All style, no substance. But he has the ear of the Helios Group, the investors behind Aethelred." As if on cue, Marcus Thorne stood up to leave, his path taking him directly past the Vance's table. He paused, his eyes scanning the group. "Richard," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Eleanor, Julian." He gave a curt nod to each of them. His eyes then fell on Amelia, and then to Liam, seated beside her. There was a moment of polite, expectant silence, the kind that demands an introduction. Liam saw the familiar wave of panic wash over Amelia's face. This wasn't just her friends or family. This was Marcus Thorne, a major player in her father's world. This was a high-stakes social test. Liam felt a strange sense of calm. He knew with absolute clarity what was about to happen. He watched as Amelia's mind raced, her internal calculus flashing across her features. "Marcus, so good to see you," she said, her voice a little too bright. She gestured to Liam. "This is my friend, Liam." Friend. The word landed in the space between them like a block of ice. It was a clean, sharp cut. In a single word, she had severed their relationship, demoted him, erased 2 years of intimacy and love to save herself a moment of perceived social embarrassment in front of a man she barely knew. Julian smirked into his wineglass. Eleanor's expression was one of cool relief. Richard, for his part, looked vaguely pleased that no complicated explanation of Liam's presence was required. Marcus Thorne, a man accustomed to reading power dynamics in a single glance, simply nodded politely at Liam. "A pleasure," he said, before turning his attention back to Richard. "Still chasing Aethelred, Richard? I hear he's about to announce his partners. Don't get your hopes up." With a final, razor-thin smile, he was gone. The conversation at the table resumed, but for Liam, the sound had faded to a dull roar. He felt nothing. The anger, the hurt, the frustration, it had all burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. This was the end of the test. Amelia had failed spectacularly. He quietly finished his meal. When the bill came, a comically large figure on a small black tray, Julian snatched it up. "Don't worry, Liam. Dad's got this. Wouldn't want you to have to wash dishes." Liam didn't respond to the jibe. Instead, he pulled out his own wallet, a simple, unadorned leather bifold. He extracted $200 bills and placed them on the table. "For my meal and Amelia's," he said evenly. He was done being subsidized. He was done being a guest. "Whoa, big spender," Julian scoffed, looking at the cash. "Finally cracked that pizza logo account, huh?" Liam stood up, his chair making a soft scraping sound on the polished floor. He looked at Amelia. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with the dawning horror of what she had just done. I I didn't mean, she started to whisper. I know what you meant, Liam said, his voice soft but carrying an unmistakable weight. He looked at Richard, at Eleanor, at Julian. He saw them not as monsters, but as what they were. Small, insecure people terrified of anything that didn't reflect their own narrow definition of worth. Enjoy the rest of your evening. He walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. He didn't wait for Amelia to follow. He knew she wouldn't. Not yet. She was still trapped in their orbit. Once outside in the cool night air, he didn't get in his car. He walked a block down the street, the city lights blurring around him. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Harrison, he said when the man on the other end picked up. Mr. Harrison was his lawyer, his agent, and the fiercely protective guardian of the Aethelred identity. Liam, is everything all right? Harrison's voice was sharp with concern. Everything is perfectly clear, Liam replied. The Vance family is hosting their annual hospital gala in 3 weeks, correct? That's right. Eleanor Vance has been hounding me for a donation for months. Good, Liam said. I need you to arrange something. I have a new keynote speaker for them. He paused, a plan crystallizing in his mind, as clean and precise as a blueprint. It's time for Ethelred to make a public appearance. The invitation to the St. Jude's Children's Hospital Gala arrived via courier. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold embossing. Amelia delivered it to his door herself. She had been calling and texting incessantly for 2 weeks, a barrage of apologies, explanations, and pleas. He had answered none of them. Please, Liam, she said, standing on his doorstep, looking haggard and lost. Just talk to me. He opened the door wider and let her in. His apartment was, as always, neat and sparse. He took the invitation from her hand and placed it on his table, next to his worn leather tube. My family's gala, she said, stating the obvious. It's the most important night of the year for my mother. For all of them. I want you to come with me. Liam looked at her, his expression unreadable. Why would I do that, Amelia? To give me one last chance, she said, tears welling in her eyes again. It was a currency that was rapidly losing its value. I know what I did. At the restaurant, it was unforgivable. I was scared and stupid and weak. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Liam, about them, about me, about us. I'm ready. I swear I am. I will walk into that ballroom and I will introduce you to everyone, proudly, as the man I love. I will shut down my brother. I will correct my mother. I will stand up to my father. Please, let me show you that I can be the woman you deserve. Her speech was impassioned, seemingly sincere. A month ago it would have moved him. Now he felt only a detached sense of pity. She was promising to do now what she should have done all along. It was a deathbed conversion. He thought of the phone call with Harrison, of the intricate plan already in motion. Her request fit into it perfectly, a final, necessary piece of the puzzle. He needed to be there, and he needed to be there as her guest. The symmetry was too poetic to ignore. All right, Amelia, he said, his voice softer than she'd expected. One last chance. Relief washed over her so intensely she nearly sagged against the doorframe. Oh, thank you, Liam. Thank you. You won't regret it. I'll make it right, I promise. He simply nodded. As she left, giddy with a hope she had not earned, he looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Gala, a garden of dreams. He thought of Eleanor's offer to let him design the menus. A bitter smile touched his lips. He was about to give her an event she would never forget. On the night of the gala, Liam arrived in a way that was perfectly calibrated to be unremarkable. He took a taxi, avoiding the long, ostentatious procession of luxury vehicles. He wore a classic, impeccably tailored black tuxedo, but one that was notable for its lack of flash. It was the kind of suit that spoke of quiet confidence, not desperate display. He met Amelia in the grand lobby of the hotel ballroom. She looked stunning in a deep emerald gown, but her eyes were fraught with anxiety. She clung to his arm as they walked in. "Ready?" he asked her quietly. "Ready," she said, her chin held high. The moment they stepped into the ballroom, the test began. Julian, holding a glass of scotch, intercepted them immediately. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, his eyes flicking over Liam's tuxedo with disdain. "Cinderella's finally at the ball. Did you rent that, or does the pizza place have a formal uniform?" This was it, the perfect opportunity, a direct public insult. Liam felt Amelia's fingers dig into his arm. He waited for her to speak, to deliver the sharp, definitive rebuke she had promised. "Julian, stop it," she said, but her voice was a weak hiss, not a roar. She was trying to avoid a scene, not win a battle. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" Julian laughed, a loud, braying sound that turned several heads. "I'm not the one who brought a freeloader to $1,000 a plate dinner. He's here to observe how the other half lives, I suppose. Taking notes for his next masterpiece, the menu for a bowling alley." The people nearby chuckled. The humiliation was acute, public, and precisely what Amelia had sworn to prevent. And she folded. She pulled Liam away, her face burning, dragging him toward a less crowded corner of the room. "Let's just ignore him," she muttered. "He's drunk." It was another excuse, another failure. Liam said nothing. He merely extracted his arm from her grasp and looked around the opulent ballroom. He saw Richard Vance across the room, deep in conversation with a portly, bald man. Liam recognized him immediately. Mr. Chen, the lead representative for the Helios Group, the primary investors behind the Serafina project. Richard was gesturing wildly, his face a mask of desperate salesmanship. This was the night he hoped to secure his legacy. The evening wore on, a slow-motion disaster for the Vances. The keynote speaker, a famous environmental philanthropist, had canceled at the last minute due to a family emergency. A palpable panic began to ripple through the event staff. Eleanor's perfect smile was stretched thin, her eyes darting nervously toward the stage. Richard's conversation with Mr. Chen had clearly stalled. The investor looked bored, checking his watch. The night, her family's crowning social achievement, was crumbling into a fiasco. Amelia was oblivious, lost in her own misery. "I'm sorry, Liam," she whispered for the 10th time. "I froze." "I know," he said, and he did. He had expected it. Just then, the event coordinator scurried onto the stage and tapped the microphone nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. We've had a slight change in our program. Our esteemed speaker, Dr. Albright, was unavoidably detained." A murmur of disappointment went through the crowd. Richard Vance looked apoplectic. This was an utter catastrophe. But before the coordinator could continue his stammering apology, a figure emerged from the wings and walked calmly to the podium. It was Mr. Harrison, Liam's agent, looking impossibly sharp in a tailored suit. "Good evening," Harrison said, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the nervous chatter. "While Dr. Albright sends her deepest regrets, we are fortunate to have a truly remarkable replacement, an individual whose work is not just about charity, but about fundamentally reshaping our world for the better." The crowd quieted, intrigued. Richard Vance leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. Who could possibly save this disaster? "Tonight," Harrison continued, a dramatic pause hanging in the air, "the Helios Group is proud to present, for the very first time, the visionary architect who has, until now, remained completely anonymous. The mind behind some of the most innovative and sustainable structures on the planet. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the creator of the Serafina project, the man known as Aethelred." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The name landed like a thunderclap. This was a coup of unimaginable proportions. The most reclusive genius in the modern world was here, at their gala. Richard Vance's face transformed from despair to delirious triumph. He clapped Mr. Chen on the back. You see, Chen? This is the kind of event I host. I told you I had connections. Eleanor looked as if she'd been granted a divine miracle. Julian was smug, already calculating the social capital. This would be the story of the year. The Vances had Aethelred. Amelia, standing beside Liam, grabbed his hand. Oh my God, Liam, can you believe this? Aethelred is here. My dad is going to lose his mind. This saves everything. Liam looked at her, at the innocent, uncomprehending excitement on her face. He felt a pang of something almost like grief. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Yes, he said softly. It changes everything. On stage, Mr. Harrison smiled. It is my distinct honor and personal privilege to introduce the mind behind Aethelred Designs, a man of unparalleled vision and integrity, Mr. Liam Carter. Harrison turned and gestured, not to the wings, but directly out into the audience, directly to the corner where Liam and Amelia were standing. Silence. It was not a quiet silence. It was a roar of absence, a physical void where the sound of 300 people breathing had been. Every head in the room turned, a slow, synchronized wave of disbelief. They followed the line of Harrison's gesture to the unassuming man in the simple black tuxedo. Liam met their stares. He gave Amelia's hand one last final squeeze and let it go. He began to walk toward the stage. The journey from his corner of the ballroom to the stage felt like a mile. With every step, the sea of faces parted before him. He could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of confusion, shock, and dawning comprehension. He walked past Richard Vance's table. Richard was frozen, his mouth agape, his hand still on Mr. Chen's shoulder. The investor, Mr. Chen, was staring at Liam, his expression one of intense, calculating interest. Liam passed Julian, who looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face slack-jawed, the Scotch glass frozen halfway to his lips. He saw Eleanor, her painted smile shattered, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. And he saw Amelia. She was rooted to the spot, her hand still outstretched from where he had let it go. Her face was a canvas of utter devastation as the pieces clicked into place with brutal, horrifying clarity. The secret he had shared with her, the one she had deemed too burdensome, too frightening to acknowledge, was now exploding into public view in the most dramatic way imaginable. Her lie of omission had just collided with the truth, and the wreckage was her entire world. Liam reached the stage and shook Mr. Harrison's hand. He turned to the audience, the bright stage lights warm on his face. He walked to the center of the stage, where a simple lectern stood. He reached down to the floor beside it, where an attendant had placed his unassuming leather tube. He calmly unscrewed the cap, pulled out a single rolled blueprint, and spread it across the lectern. It was the master site plan for the Serafina project. He looked out at the silent, stunned crowd. He found Amelia's eyes again. He saw the tears beginning to stream down her face, but he felt no triumph, only a deep, profound sorrow for the choice she hadn't made. Then he turned his attention to the microphone. "Good evening," Liam began, his voice steady and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous room. "My name is Liam Carter." He let the name settle, allowing the 300 minds in the room to reconcile the man they thought they knew, or the man the Vances had presented with the name Harrison had just announced. "For many years I have chosen to do my work privately," he continued. "I believe that a building, like a person, should be judged on its own merits, on its integrity, its purpose, its impact on the world, not on the name or the reputation attached to it. A structure's worth is in its foundation, its design, its harmony with its environment. It is not in the prestige of its architect." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the front rows, where the Vance family sat like statues in a tragedy. Richard's face had gone from triumphant to ashen. Eleanor seemed to be shrinking into her chair. "Tonight's theme is a garden of dreams. It's a beautiful sentiment. My dream has always been to build structures that don't just occupy a space, but enrich it. That's the philosophy behind the Serafina project. He tapped the blueprint on the lectern. This isn't just a resort, it's a self-sustaining biosphere, a closed-loop system that will generate its own power, recycle its own water, and produce zero carbon emissions. It's a testament to the idea that human ingenuity and the natural world can and must coexist in harmony. He spoke for 10 minutes about the project, his passion evident in every word. He described the solar glass atriums, the geothermal energy cores, the hydroponic farms that would feed the residents. The crowd, initially stunned into silence, was now rapt. He was not just an architect, he was a visionary, and they were hanging on his every word. Mr. Chen, the investor, was leaning forward, his expression one of deep admiration. Then Liam's tone shifted. He looked up from his blueprints, his gaze finding the Vances once more. The warmth in his voice was replaced by a cool, clear precision. But dreams, like buildings, require a strong foundation. And the strongest foundation is integrity. The truest measure of value isn't found in a bank account or a brand name or the car you drive. It's found in how you treat people, especially those you believe have nothing to offer you. A chill went through the room. This was no longer an architectural lecture. It was a reckoning. "I have been a guest in the Vance family's home," Liam said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the ballroom. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quietness was more damning. "And I have learned some valuable lessons. I learned that the car I drive, a reliable 10-year-old sedan, was cause for public ridicule and an offer of charity." Julian flinched as if he'd been physically struck. The people at the surrounding tables who had heard his earlier remarks turned to stare at him with open contempt. "I learned," Liam continued, "that my life's work, the very thing we are here to discuss tonight, was considered suitable for designing place cards and menus for a luncheon." Eleanor made a small, strangled sound. Her face, caked in expensive makeup, was now a ghastly shade of white. Her friends at her table subtly shifted their chairs away from her. "And just a few weeks ago, in a fine restaurant, I learned that a 2-year relationship, a partnership built on love and trust, could be demoted to a friendship to avoid a moment of social inconvenience in front of a business rival." His eyes finally, sorrowfully, rested on Amelia, who was now openly sobbing, her body shaking with the force of her shame. "These were not tests, I said," Liam said, his voice softening with a note of sadness. "They were choices that were made, choices that reveal character more than any financial statement ever could." He looked directly at Richard Vance, whose face had collapsed into a mask of pure dread. As if on cue, Richard, in a desperate, reflexive act of denial, pulled out his phone. His fingers trembled as he typed Liam Carter Aethelred into the search bar. The screen lit up with his worst fears made real. Articles, interviews with Harrison, corporate filings, all confirming the impossible truth. The blood drained from his face. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the table. "The Serafina project," Liam concluded, his voice regaining its professional tone, "is more than a building. It is a statement of values. It is about transparency, sustainability, and respect. Therefore, any partner we choose must share those values in their entirety." He looked at Mr. Chen, then back at Richard. "For that reason, Vance Development's bid will no longer be under consideration." The statement was a clean, fatal blow. It was not delivered with anger or malice, but as a simple, unavoidable business consequence. A quiet bomb that had just obliterated Richard Vance's ambitions. Liam rolled up his blueprint, slid it back into its leather tube, and gave a slight nod to the stunned audience. "Thank you for your time, and please, give generously to the children." He walked off the stage, leaving a crater of silence in his wake. The moment Liam stepped off the stage, the ballroom erupted. It was not applause, but a cacophony of frantic whispers, of chairs scraping, of people surging forward. But they weren't surging toward the Vances. They were surging toward Liam. A protective circle formed around him, led by Mr. Harrison, who expertly fended off the most aggressive well-wishers. Mr. Chen, the investor from the Helios Group, was the first to break through, his hand extended, his face beaming. "Mr. Carter, an honor, a true honor," Chen said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "Your speech, your vision, it is exactly what we hoped for. Marcus Thorne has been telling me for months that you were the real deal, but this is beyond expectations. We must talk. Tomorrow, my office." "I'll have Mr. Harrison arrange it," Liam replied calmly, shaking the man's hand. From the corner of his eye, he saw Richard Vance watching the exchange, his face a portrait of agony. The prize he had coveted above all else was shaking hands with his conqueror right in front of him. The social currency he had built his life on had just been declared counterfeit. The Vances were now an island of disgrace in the middle of their own party. Guests who had been fawning over them an hour before now gave their table a wide berth, whispering behind their hands as they passed. They were radioactive. Julian, his face flushed with a mixture of alcohol and shame, made a desperate lunge toward Liam. "Liam, man, Mr. Carter, hey, I was just joking, you know? The car, the menus, it's just how I am. A little ribbing. I had no idea. Man, I am so sorry." The apology was a pathetic, self-serving scramble. Liam didn't even look at him. Mr. Harrison stepped in between them, a silent, immovable wall. "I believe Mr. Carter is otherwise engaged," Harrison said, his voice arctic. Julian stumbled backward, rejected and humiliated, and retreated back to his family's table like a beaten dog. Next came Richard. He approached tentatively, his usual bluster completely gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading humility. He looked 10 years older than he had at the start of the evening. "Mr. Carter, Liam," he began, his voice raspy, "that was quite a speech. Listen, about the bid. I understand your position. I do. My family, they were out of line. Unforgivably so. But my business, Vance Development is a good company. Solid fundamentals. We can execute your vision. Don't let a personal misunderstanding cloud a multi-billion-dollar project." He was still trying to make a deal. Even now he saw it as a negotiation. Liam finally turned to look at him, his expression not of anger, but of pity. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice low and firm, "you still don't understand. This isn't a negotiation. It's a consequence. Your company's fundamentals are irrelevant when its leadership's values are so fundamentally corrupt. We will not be working together. That is final." Richard staggered back, the finality of the words hitting him like a physical blow. He had lost, completely and irrevocably. Finally, a path cleared, and Amelia stood before him. Her makeup was ruined, her beautiful emerald dress now seeming like a costume for a part she could no longer play. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, watching the final act of the drama. "Liam," she whispered, her voice broken, "I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I love you. I was weak and I was a coward, and I let you down in every way possible. Please, don't let this be the end. We can fix this." He looked at her, and for the first time that night, he let his own pain show. The profound disappointment, the sorrow for what they had lost, what she had thrown away. "Fix what, Amelia?" he asked gently. "The fact that you were ashamed of me? The fact that you valued the opinion of your family, of Marcus Thorne, of strangers, more than you valued my dignity? You can't fix that with an apology after the fact. You fix it in the moment. You fix it by being brave." He reached out, not to touch her, but to gesture at the wreckage of her family around them. "They did this, but you let them. You handed them the knife every single time. You were my partner, Amelia. You were supposed to be my safe harbor, and instead you let them turn you into another storm." Tears streamed down her face. "I know, but I can change. I will change. For you." "Don't change for me," he said, his voice filled with a terrible sadness. "If you're going to change, do it for yourself. Do it because you want to be a person of integrity, not because you want to win back a wealthy boyfriend. The person you need to become is someone who would have defended the pizza logo designer, not just the world-famous architect." He paused, delivering the final, heartbreaking truth. "Love doesn't ask you to be smaller, Amelia. It should have made you brave. I'm sorry, but I can't go back." He turned and walked away, Mr. Harrison at his side, leaving her standing alone in the center of the ballroom, a beautiful, tragic monument to her own cowardice. The garden of her dreams had been torched, and she had been the one holding the match. The months that followed the gala unfolded with the slow, inevitable gravity of consequences. Liam, now free from the cloak of anonymity, found the world rushing to embrace him. The Serafina project, now publicly attached to his name and face, became an even bigger global phenomenon. The partnership with Mr. Chen's Helios Group was finalized in a record-breaking deal, and Liam was given complete, creative, and ethical control. He was on magazine covers, not as a mysterious phantom, but as Liam Carter, the man who was rebuilding the world, one sustainable masterpiece at a time. He was happier than he had been in years, the lightness of living in his own truth, a feeling more liberating than any success. For the Vances, the fallout was catastrophic. The gala became the stuff of legend in their social circles, a story told with schadenfreude at every subsequent charity event and country club dinner. They were no longer powerful, they were a punchline. Eleanor's social life evaporated. Her carefully curated group of friends who had orbited her for her status abandoned her overnight. Her phone calls went unreturned. Her luncheon invitations were politely declined. She became a pariah, isolated in the opulent mansion that now felt like a prison, a constant reminder of the humiliation she had architected. Julian faced a more direct form of professional disgrace. The story of his public mockery of one of the world's most respected figures spread like wildfire through the finance community. He was seen as a boorish fool, a liability. After several excruciating weeks of being shunned at work and losing key accounts whose leaders wanted nothing to do with him, he quietly accepted a forced transfer to a satellite office in a city he despised. It was a demotion in all but name. Richard Vance suffered the most tangible loss. The public rejection by Aethelred sent shockwaves through the development industry. It wasn't just about losing the Serafina contract. It was about the public branding of his company's leadership as corrupt. Investors grew wary. Partners pulled out of pending deals. Thorne Consolidated, led by the astute Marcus Thorne, capitalized on Richard's weakness, poaching his best talent and securing two other major contracts that Vance Development had been favored to win. Richard's company wasn't destroyed, but it was crippled, a giant brought to its knees by its own hubris. He was forced to sell off a significant portion of his assets just to stay afloat, a humbling retreat for a man who had only ever known expansion. And then there was Amelia. She disappeared from the social scene entirely. Liam heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had moved out of her stylish apartment and into a smaller, more modest place. She'd quit her job in marketing, a career her father had arranged for her, and had gone back to school to study social work. She was in therapy, confronting the deep-seated insecurities that had been nurtured by her family's toxic obsession with status. She was, it seemed, finally trying to become the person she should have been all along. She wrote him a letter, a long one, about 6 months after the gala. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was an apology, clear-eyed and unflinching. She took full responsibility for her weakness, for her silence, for the 1,000 small cuts she had inflicted on him. She wrote that the gala, as horrific as it was, had been a necessary cataclysm, shattering the false world she was living in and forcing her to build a new one based on authentic values. She did not ask to see him. She did not ask for a reply. She only wished him happiness and thanked him for, inadvertently, setting her free. Liam read the letter in his office, a beautiful, light-filled space of his own design overlooking the construction site of the Serafina project. He felt a sense of closure, a quiet sadness for the love that had been lost, but also a sliver of hope for her. He hoped she would find her way. His life was full. His work was challenging and fulfilling. He was surrounded by people who respected him for his mind and his character. He had found what he was looking for all along, a life of integrity lived in the open. The revenge he had exacted was not born of malice, but of a simple, powerful truth, that a person's real worth is not something that can be given or taken away by others. It is something you build yourself, from the foundation up. The Vances had tried to demolish him, but they had forgotten to check his blueprints. His foundation was sound. Theirs was built on sand, and when the storm came, everything fell exactly as it should. The sun streamed through the vast windows of his office, catching the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, glittering possibilities. He looked down at the sprawling construction site below, at the graceful, rising skeleton of the Serafina project. It was his dream taking shape, a testament not to his name, but to his ideals. He had faced down the arrogance and the prejudice, and he had not compromised his integrity. He had not become cruel or vindictive. He had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had shattered the illusion. The true victory, he realized, wasn't in their downfall, but in his own quiet, unshakable self-respect. It was the one structure he had built that could never be torn down. He picked up a pen and began to sketch. A new idea, a new dream, already forming on the page. The work continued, and he was free. We build our lives every day with our choices, don't we? We choose whether to stand up for what's right, whether to defend those we love, and whether to value integrity over appearance. Liam's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how loudly you announce your worth, but about how quietly you live it. The world is full of people who will try to judge you based on shallow things, but your value is never up for their debate. Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated, or had to make a choice between what was easy and what was right? I'd be genuinely interested to read about your experiences in the comments below. It's a conversation worth having. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you found this story satisfying, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more tales of justice, redemption, and the enduring power of character. Until next time, remember to build your own foundation strong.